It was supposed to be a simple decision, one that could solidify his happiness forever. But as he stood in his lavish office overlooking the city, the millionaire couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change irrevocably. With one hand on the polished desk, he gazed out of the window at the world he had worked so hard to build. His life was perfect, wasn't it? He had wealth, power, and everything most men would envy. Yet, the choice he was about to make would send ripples that would reverberate far beyond the glittering skyline. On one side was his wife, the mother of his newborn child, soft-spoken, kind-hearted, and devoted to their family. She had given him everything, from years of companionship to the joy of raising a child together. She had stood by him through thick and thin, offering support when the business world grew cold. But as the months passed, their relationship began to feel like something predictable, something comfortable. And then there was her, Sophia. His mistress. She was beautiful, confident, and full of life. She brought excitement to his days, made him feel alive in ways he hadn't felt in years. Her presence was intoxicating, like the finest wine, he couldn't get enough. But as much as he adored her, he knew she was the escape, the distraction. She wasn't the life he had built, but in some ways, she offered the freedom that his wife no longer could. It was late one evening when the decision hit him. He had been with Sophia all day, their laughter echoing through the penthouse as they shared meals, stories, and fantasies. Everything felt perfect, like the world was his oyster. But as he drove home that night, the thought haunted him, the thought that the love of his life, his wife, might not be enough anymore. Maybe it was time for a change. The next morning, after the baby was settled into her crib and his wife had gone to the store, he picked up the phone and dialed Sophia's number. His heart raced as he listened to the ringing on the other end. When she finally picked up, her voice was warm, as always. "I think it's time," he said, almost in a whisper, unsure of the words he was about to speak. "Time for what?" she asked, her voice full of curiosity, yet laced with a hint of expectation. "It's time to make a choice. You, Sophia. You and me, together, no more hiding, no more distractions. I'm choosing you over everything." A heavy silence hung in the air, but he could hear her sharp breath, the excitement she tried to conceal. She had always wanted this, but he hadn't been ready. Now, it seemed, the time had come. He didn't look back when he ended the call. In his mind, the decision was final. He was ready for the future with her, no looking back at the life he had left behind. But as he turned to leave his office, an eerie sense of unease crept over him. What had he done? Was this really the right choice? He shook it off, telling himself that this was just the beginning. This was the life he had earned, and with Sophia by his side, nothing could stand in his way. But little did he know, the first stone had been thrown in a chain reaction of events that would leave him questioning everything he once held dear. The path ahead was more uncertain than he realized, and the consequences of his choice would soon unfold in ways he could never have imagined. And so, with one phone call, he unknowingly sealed his fate, taking the first step down a road that would lead to regret, one he couldn't turn back from. In the weeks following his decision, life for the millionaire seemed to transform into a whirlwind of indulgence and fleeting pleasures. With Sophia by his side, the world felt like a constant celebration, dinners at five-star restaurants, private jets to tropical islands, and spontaneous getaways to the most exclusive destinations. Everything he had ever wanted was now within reach, and Sophia was the perfect partner for his new life. She made him feel young again, carefree, as though the weight of responsibility had been lifted from his shoulders. At first, he couldn't get enough of the excitement. Every moment felt electric, as if they were living in a world where the rules didn't apply. Sophia was everything his wife had stopped being, a reminder of the passion and desire he thought he had lost. She was beautiful, bold, and fiercely independent. He couldn't help but admire how she seemed to embrace every moment, as if life itself was a treasure to be claimed. But beneath the surface of this perfect life, cracks began to form. The more he indulged in his new relationship, the more he noticed that things weren't as flawless as they appeared. Sophia's carefree attitude, which had once been charming, started to feel demanding. Her laughter no longer rang with pure joy but with a sharpness that hinted at expectation. The small gestures that used to excite him, like the surprise flowers or the playful teasing, began to feel like obligations rather than spontaneous acts of love. The millionaire tried to shake off the nagging feeling that perhaps he had made a mistake. He had everything now, didn't he? Wealth, power, and the woman he desired. But there were moments, brief and fleeting, when he found himself lost in thought, moments when he would stare out the window, his mind drifting back to his wife, his child, and the life he had chosen to leave behind. His wife had been there for him through every setback, every challenge. She had been his partner in every sense of the word, and now, as he thought about her, he couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. But guilt was a fleeting visitor. It never lingered for long. Whenever it threatened to take root, he would remind himself of how much better his life was now. He couldn't be tied down to the past, he had moved forward, and Sophia was his future. She was everything his wife wasn't, and surely, that was enough. Still, as the days passed, he began to sense a shift in Sophia. The carefree confidence she once radiated started to fade. Now, her eyes seemed less bright, her smiles less genuine. She began to demand more time, more attention, more commitment. She didn't want to be just the mistress anymore. She wanted a life, a future, a place by his side, without the secrets, without the half-life they were living. She wanted him to leave his wife, to cut all ties, and make her the center of his world. The pressure started to build. The millionaire tried to brush it off at first, dismissing her as just being needy. But the requests became more insistent, the conversations more intense. Sophia wasn't content with just being his escape anymore, she wanted more, and she wanted it now. In moments of vulnerability, he could see the cracks in her persona. She wasn't as flawless as she had appeared. She, too, had insecurities, desires, and ambitions. What had once seemed like a carefree relationship now felt like a heavy burden. But he didn't know how to go back. He had made his choice, and he would have to live with it. In the midst of his growing unease, he received a phone call that only added to the weight on his shoulders. His wife had filed for divorce. The paperwork had been sent to his office, and there was no denying it now. She was serious. She had finally made her move, and she was done with him. He hadn't expected it to happen so quickly. In his mind, he thought she would wait, that she would try to fix things, or that she might even beg him to come back. But there was no drama, no pleading. She was strong, resolute, and focused on the future. The millionaire couldn't help but feel a strange sense of admiration for her. She was no longer the woman he had taken for granted. She had become something else entirely, something he wasn't sure he could ever have again. But he wasn't ready to admit he had made a mistake. Not yet. Not when he was living the life he had always dreamed of. Sophia was still by his side, still offering him the excitement and passion he craved. But as the days went on, he couldn't shake the growing feeling that he had miscalculated, that the life he had chosen wasn't as perfect as he had imagined. There was no turning back now, and deep down, he knew it. His life had taken a turn he couldn't control, and soon, he would find out just how far the consequences would go. As he stared at the divorce papers on his desk, he realized one painful truth: it was too late to fix things. The millionaire's life had spiraled into chaos faster than he could have ever anticipated. What seemed like the perfect escape, the ideal future with Sophia, quickly began to unravel. His days, once filled with the excitement of new adventures, were now marked by a growing sense of emptiness. Sophia, who had once been his thrilling distraction, was now demanding and possessive. The spark that had drawn him to her seemed to have faded, replaced by a cold, calculated desire for control. Sophia's constant need for attention had become overwhelming. She was no longer the playful lover he had indulged in, she was now a woman who wanted everything, his time, his future, and his money. Each conversation with her grew more strained, as she insisted that he leave everything behind, his business, his wife, his family. She wanted him to cut ties completely, to make her his permanent partner. But the millionaire, still grappling with his choice, found himself trapped in a web of expectations and guilt. As the pressure mounted, his business began to suffer. What had once been a thriving empire now teetered on the edge of collapse. Key deals fell through, investors grew wary, and competitors sensed his distraction. He found it harder and harder to focus on work, as his mind constantly drifted back to his wife and child, wondering if he had made the biggest mistake of his life. But Sophia had no patience for his doubts. She demanded that he focus on her, on their life together. She made it clear that if he didn't give her everything, she would walk away, leaving him with nothing. His wife, meanwhile, had found her strength. She had already moved on, securing her own future with the support of friends and family who rallied around her. She had hired a lawyer who was efficient and ruthless, determined to make sure the divorce settlement was fair and final. The millionaire, too proud to admit that he had made a grave error, continued to bury himself in his luxurious lifestyle, pretending that he could still have it all. But the cracks in his world were growing wider. He could no longer ignore the strain between him and Sophia, or the overwhelming loneliness that gripped him every time he found himself alone. Every day he spent with her felt like a countdown to an inevitable collapse. And yet, he continued to chase after the life he thought he wanted, too proud to admit his mistake. It wasn't long before he received a call from his lawyer. The news was devastating. His once thriving business was now facing severe financial setbacks. The divorce settlement was demanding, and with the business on the brink of bankruptcy, the millionaire's wealth was slipping through his fingers faster than he could hold on. The life he had so carefully crafted was falling apart, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Sophia, seeing the cracks in his empire, became even more insistent. She had always known how to play him, how to make him feel like he couldn't live without her. But now, her demands seemed less like love and more like manipulation. The millionaire's heart ached with a gnawing realization that he had never truly known her. She had used him, just as he had used her for a fleeting escape. The trust, the connection he thought they shared, had been nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion. As the days passed, his world continued to crumble. Sophia's behavior grew more erratic, and the once perfect relationship began to feel suffocating. The millionaire could no longer ignore the fact that he had made the wrong choice. He had sacrificed everything for a fleeting moment of excitement, only to find that the pleasure had turned into pain. The emptiness that had once been filled with indulgence now consumed him, and he was left with nothing but regret. But the most painful blow came when he received a final message from his wife. She had moved on, and she was happy. She had found a new partner, someone who cherished her and their child. The millionaire was struck with a deep sense of loss, realizing that he had lost not just a wife, but a family, something he would never be able to reclaim. The truth hit him hard. In his pursuit of pleasure, he had destroyed the most important relationships in his life. His wealth, his status, and his fleeting happiness with Sophia had all come at the cost of his family, his integrity, and his peace of mind. He had gambled everything, and now, there was no going back. His choices had led him down a path of destruction, and he was left with nothing but the consequences of his actions. The millionaire's world had crumbled, and now, all that remained was the stark reality of the price he had paid for his decisions. The weight of the millionaire's choices pressed down on him like an unrelenting storm. His once gilded life, built on wealth, power, and indulgence, now felt like a cage, cold, empty, and suffocating. No matter how hard he tried to fix the damage, the cracks in his world deepened. He found himself on the phone with his lawyer, trying to salvage what was left of his business, his finances, and his reputation. But the conversations were always the same. Too little, too late. Sophia, once the symbol of his escape, now seemed like a prison in itself. The more desperate he became, the more demanding she grew. Her voice, once soft and alluring, now carried a sharpness that cut through the millionaire's nerves. She wanted more. Always more. Every conversation with her felt like a negotiation he was losing. She wasn't the woman he had fallen for, she had become something else, something more dangerous, something that seemed to feed off his despair. "I need more, don't you understand?" Sophia's voice crackled through the phone, her frustration clear. "You've chosen me, haven't you? Then show me that I'm worth it. Leave her. Leave everything behind." The millionaire's heart pounded in his chest as he listened to her demands. How had he come to this? How had he gone from having everything to being at the mercy of a woman who was nothing like the one he had initially desired? She had become a symbol of his own failure, a constant reminder of how far he had fallen. He tried to keep his composure. "I'm doing the best I can," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "But things are falling apart. My business is on the verge of collapse. My reputation is shattered. We need to slow down, to give it some time to fix itself." Sophia's laugh was bitter. "Time? You think time will fix anything? You've made your choice, but you've forgotten one thing: you can't have it all. You can't keep running from the consequences of your actions." Her words hit him harder than any of the business setbacks, harder than the loss of his wife and child. They echoed in his mind, reminding him that he had made his bed, and now, he had to lie in it. But the millionaire wasn't ready to accept the truth. Not yet. He couldn't. So he threw himself deeper into work, hoping to salvage what little he could from the wreckage. He spent late nights at the office, poring over financial reports, making desperate calls to investors, trying to patch together the pieces of his crumbling empire. But every time he thought he was making progress, another problem would arise. His wealth, once a symbol of security, now felt like a burden, dragging him down with every passing day. He reached out to his wife, hoping for some sign that there was a way back. He wanted to tell her that he was sorry, that he had made a terrible mistake. But the messages went unanswered. She had moved on, and her silence was a painful reminder of his failure. There was no forgiveness waiting for him. No second chance. She had given him everything, and he had thrown it all away. The millionaire's attempts to fix things only made them worse. Sophia grew more distant, her patience running thin as she realized that he couldn't deliver on his promises. She had been his escape, his thrill, but now she was nothing more than a constant reminder of the life he had destroyed. He no longer knew what he wanted. Was it her? Was it his family? Was it his business? The more he tried to fix his mistakes, the more he felt like he was losing control of everything. In a moment of quiet desperation, he found himself standing in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection. The man he saw there was no longer the confident, successful businessman he once was. He looked older, weary, worn down by the choices he had made. His eyes were empty, hollow, as if all the life had been drained from him. He had everything, and now, he had nothing. Sophia had threatened to leave him, and his business was on the brink of collapse. His marriage was over, his family was gone, and all that remained was the wreckage of a life he couldn't fix. The millionaire realized, perhaps for the first time, that no amount of money, no amount of power, could repair the damage he had done. His world, once so carefully crafted, was falling apart piece by piece, and no matter how hard he tried to hold it together, it was slipping through his fingers like sand. He picked up the phone again, dialing his wife's number one more time. But before he could press call, he stopped. What could he say? What was left to say? The answer was nothing. There was nothing left but regret. And in that moment, he knew, the damage was done. There was no going back. The life he had chosen, the life he had fought so hard to build, had crumbled beneath him, the millionaire's life had reached its breaking point. He had lost everything that mattered: his family, his business, and his peace of mind. As he stood in the quiet emptiness of his once thriving office, he could feel the weight of his decisions pressing down on him like a suffocating fog. Every corner of his life now seemed tainted by regret, and every attempt to fix things had only made them worse. Sophia, the woman he had once believed was the answer to his unhappiness, had become an ever-present source of tension and despair. She had once been the symbol of excitement and escape, but now she felt more like a trap, her demands growing more insistent with each passing day, her affection more conditional, and her patience wearing thin. What had once seemed like the perfect relationship now felt like a constant battle, and he was losing. The millionaire's phone buzzed with an incoming message from Sophia. He hesitated before reading it, knowing that whatever it was, it wouldn't bring the resolution he so desperately sought. The message was brief, but it hit him like a punch to the gut. "I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving. You've made it clear that you can't give me what I need. Goodbye." His heart sank as he read the words. It was over. She had finally walked away, leaving him with nothing but the hollow remnants of the life he had chosen. The woman he had pursued so relentlessly had finally given up on him, just as his wife had. And in that moment, he realized something he had been refusing to acknowledge for so long: he had been chasing the wrong things. The revelation hit him like a tidal wave. He had spent so much of his life pursuing wealth, power, and fleeting pleasures that he had forgotten what truly mattered. He had pushed away the people who loved him, taken for granted the stability and support his wife had provided, and chased after superficial desires that had only led him to loneliness and regret. And now, in the wake of his choices, he was left with nothing but emptiness. As he sat there in the quiet of his office, the millionaire began to reflect on the decisions that had led him to this point. His wife, the woman he had promised to love and cherish, had always been there for him, through thick and thin. She had been his rock, the person who had stood by him when things were tough, and the mother of his child. But he had cast her aside for the excitement of a new life, a life that now seemed hollow and empty. Sophia had promised him freedom, but all she had given him was a life filled with pressure and isolation. The more he tried to appease her, the more he lost himself. And now, she was gone, leaving him with nothing but the painful realization that he had chosen the wrong path. The millionaire's mind raced as he thought about his wife, who had moved on without him. He had been too proud to admit his mistake, too stubborn to ask for forgiveness. But now, it was too late. She had found her own happiness, and there was no place for him in her life anymore. He could never undo the damage he had caused, never undo the pain he had inflicted on her. But the most painful realization of all was the truth about himself. He had spent so much time building his empire, amassing wealth and status, that he had lost sight of who he really was. The man in the mirror was no longer the man he had once been, confident, strong, and determined. Instead, he was a broken man, lost in a world of regret and sorrow. And yet, even in the depths of his despair, the millionaire understood something. The pain he was feeling now, the emptiness that consumed him, was the result of his own choices. He had created this situation, and now he had to live with the consequences. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of clarity. It was too late to fix things with his wife. It was too late to turn back the clock and undo his mistakes. But maybe, just maybe, he could begin to rebuild his life, this time, from the ground up. He didn't know where the road would lead, or if he would ever find peace again, but he knew one thing for certain: he had learned a lesson that would stay with him for the rest of his life. The pursuit of wealth, power, and fleeting pleasures had brought him nothing but pain. But love, loyalty, and family, that was where true fulfillment lay. If he ever found a way to move forward, it would be because he had learned to cherish the things that truly mattered. And as he sat there, alone in the ruins of his former life, he realized that the road to redemption would be long and difficult. But it was a road he had to walk, because there was no going back. The millionaire's world had been shattered, and now, all that remained was the painful task of picking up the pieces. The weeks that followed were some of the loneliest of the millionaire's life. The pain of losing everything, his family, his business, and the woman he thought could bring him happiness, was a constant companion. Each day felt like a struggle, as he faced the harsh realities of his choices. No longer surrounded by the comforts of wealth and luxury, he was forced to confront the consequences of the life he had built. And yet, amidst the darkness, something began to shift inside him. For the first time in years, the millionaire began to question everything he had taken for granted. He had spent so much time pursuing the approval of others, building an empire based on status and superficial desires, that he had forgotten what really mattered. Love, loyalty, and connection, these were the things that gave life meaning. Not money. Not power. Not the fleeting pleasure of a momentary escape. The days of frantic phone calls to lawyers, desperate attempts to salvage his business, and futile efforts to win back Sophia seemed distant now. The millionaire had finally come to the painful realization that no amount of wealth could fill the emptiness inside him. He could no longer hide from the truth. The life he had been chasing, the life he had thought was perfect, had left him broken. But as he sat alone in his empty apartment, surrounded by the remnants of his former life, a new clarity began to emerge. For the first time, he understood that redemption wasn't about fixing everything. It wasn't about going back to how things used to be. It was about moving forward, accepting the mistakes he had made and learning from them. It was about becoming a better man, not for anyone else, but for himself. The millionaire knew that he could never undo the past. He could never make things right with his wife, and the damage to his business was irreversible. But he had one thing left, the chance to rebuild his life from the ground up. And that, he realized, was the most valuable gift he could give himself. He decided to reach out, not to ask for forgiveness or make promises he couldn't keep, but to show the people he had wronged that he was truly sorry. The first call was to his wife. He had no expectation that she would take him back, or that she would even want to speak to him. But he knew he owed her the truth. He owed her an apology, not for her, but for himself. When she picked up the phone, her voice was calm, almost distant. But there was no anger. No hatred. Just the quiet recognition that the man on the other end of the line was not the same one who had walked away from their marriage. "I don't expect anything from you," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. For taking you for granted. For the pain I caused. I understand if you never want to hear from me again. But I needed you to know that I regret everything." There was a long silence on the other end. Then, softly, she spoke. "I appreciate your words," she said, her voice steady. "But you need to know that I've moved on. I'm happy. I've found peace, and I hope you do too. I hope you find what you're looking for." It wasn't the reconciliation he had hoped for, but it was enough. It was a step forward, a moment of closure. And it was the first time in a long while that the millionaire felt like he could breathe. The next step was to rebuild his business, not for the same reasons he had before, but because he wanted to prove to himself that he could rise from the ashes of his past. He sought advice from those he had once dismissed, learning humility and patience. Slowly but surely, he began to regain the respect of his colleagues, though he knew it would take time to fully regain his footing. As for Sophia, he knew there was no future with her. She had been a symbol of his escape, not his salvation. And when he saw her one last time, in a brief, chance encounter at a business event, he realized that she was no longer the woman he had once desired. She was a reminder of his mistakes, but nothing more. They exchanged a few polite words, but there was no longing in his heart. He had let her go, just as he had let go of the man he used to be. The millionaire's journey of redemption wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. But each day brought him closer to the person he wanted to become. And with each step forward, he felt the weight of his past choices growing lighter. He no longer sought validation from others, no longer measured his worth by his wealth or his relationships. He had learned the hard way that the things that truly mattered couldn't be bought or controlled. They had to be earned, through love, through humility, and through the willingness to change. As the months passed, the millionaire found peace in the small things. A quiet evening spent reflecting on his journey, a walk through the park, a phone call to an old friend. These were the things that brought him true fulfillment now, not the constant pursuit of more. He had learned that life was about the connections we make, the love we give, and the lessons we learn along the way. In the end, the millionaire's life had been shattered, but in its place, something new had grown. A man who had once been driven by ego and ambition now understood the true meaning of success. It wasn't about wealth. It wasn't about power. It was about the people we love, the lessons we learn, and the peace we find within ourselves. The road to redemption was long, and it would never be easy. But the millionaire was finally on the right path. And that was enough.